everyone. Welcome back to the Talkoffame podcast. I'm Kylie, and today joining us is Hamza Islam. He is the host of the podcast Oh My Curly Goodness, where he talks to people who are Gen Z about their stories and their experiences that shaped them into the person they are today. I have been listening to the podcast over the last couple of weeks, and it features so many amazing conversations on the podcast. And better not is see a fellow podcaster. It's always so fun to talk about with fellow podcasters. It's kind of, we switch it up, but also have something to connect with having shows. But welcome to the podcast. We're so super excited to have you on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And just one suggestion. I know this is a common thing that I get, but it's pronounced Hamza. You said
Hazma. I knew
Hasmi.
I was gonna get around. Sorry about
It's
that.
yeah, it's you're good. It's Hamza. Yeah, but yeah, nevertheless, thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. So I know like you often talk to your guests about their stories and experiences, but first of all, like what is kind of like your story? Like what I know you always are asking them, but especially like what is kind of your story about going into podcasting?
Yeah, and it's funny because I just wrapped up an episode where I talk about my story, but for my podcast. But to start off, so yeah, my name is Hamza Islam. I am a student at The Ohio State University. Go Bucks! And I I would say my interest for storytelling, because that's what my podcast is about, goes back to when I was little. And one of my favorite soccer teams is Columbus Crew, as someone who grew up in Columbus, Ohio. And when me and my dad had season tickets, one of the things we got to do was meet with some of your favorite soccer players, or some of my favorite soccer players. And it was interesting because when I saw some of these soccer players representing the city of Columbus, I often forgot that they were human beings, because when you're athletes or like an actor, actress, whatever that may be, you're kind of like you're basically entertainers. And because you are admired a lot, it's easy to forget that at the end of the day they're human beings. And
Mhm.
so when I was little, I was always interested in knowing like what it's like to be another person. I used to ask this weird question like, can famous people, quote unquote, go to the grocery store, or are they going to be surrounded by paparazzis? So it was just something. I think it goes back to just my uh, my passion for my favorite soccer team, and just seeing like what it's like to be them. And then that interest then went to like other incredible people, and then also to like my friends. And then I wanted to create a podcast where I spoke to people about challenges and obstacles, and I thought, why not bring people who have done incredible things to share their story? And it's been a fun journey. But yeah, definitely a lot of research goes into the people that I interview.
Yeah, and back what you first said earlier about Ohio State, coming from Pennsylvania, me and my family are Penn State fans, as many of you know, like I hate Ohio State. People don't hate me, but I hate Ohio State coming from a Penn State fan. But of course, like I honestly thought the same exact thing about Larissa. Because I'm a person that loves entertainment, everything that involves it, like acting, singing, like I love everything. And sometimes I'll forget also that there are they human beings like us, or are they just, people with tons of fame that everyone knows them? Like sometimes I'll get wrapped up, and sometimes I'll be like, oh, they're famous, so they're not like us. Like they sometimes can't go to the grocery store without getting people going up to them. So they probably have to have some people go for them. And that's something I honestly struggle with this day, and realize like, oh, is this person a human being? But it's really just they are actually human beings like us, but it's like, they have much more fame than most of us have in one person. But I know as a podcast host, like you often like circle around on different podcasts and stuff, but do you have any favorite podcasts that you listen to?
That's a great question, because some of the podcasts I listen to include The Diary of a CEO, On Purpose with Jay Shetty, Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend for like comedic purposes. And then this is technically a podcast, but it's a show, but it's something that I like to study, like see like how the host asks certain questions. But it's called Hot, is it, it's either Hot Wings or Hot Ones,
Mhm.
where the host interviews like a celebrity or someone, and he asks questions while eating chicken wings. But the thing about his questions is that he does a lot of research on the people that he's going to be interviewing. So he doesn't ask those basic questions. It's more those thought provoking, like, oh, I actually got to think about this. So I think the podcast that I listen to, those that I mentioned, and then the show, goes back to seeing like how I named them not because of the conversations they have, but more so because of how they present their podcast and what they hope listeners can gain from their conversations. And so I always look for these podcasts to see like how to have conversations with guests, and then what kind of questions I should ask each guest, because when it does come to like vulnerability and authenticity, I want it to be like a thought-provoking thing, as opposed to like, let me get this question answered in like within 2 seconds. So
Mhm.
yeah, that's, I guess, those podcasts and then maybe that show come to mind.
I'm literally the same exact way. Like, it's a hot wing show with Jimmy Fallon.
No, I forget. I think his name is Sean Evans. I
Mm,
could be mistaken, but yeah, it's an interesting show because like each question, like the more questions they go into, he puts like more hot sauce on the chicken wing. So it's like after each question, like the wing gets a bit spicier because of the
oh.
sauce. So it's interesting, but I also like the way the host asks the guests different questions.
That's very interesting. I have to check it out because I know that Jimmy Fallon has, or Jimmy Kimmel, one of them has a show like that, like hot wings, where they do celebrities and give them hot wings. It's like a little segment. So I thought it was that one, but that seems so interesting. I have to check it out. But like recently, I know doing interviews 24/7, it really is like a learning experience outside of school. Because I feel like with podcasting, you learn so much from actual school with in terms of real life stuff. I don't know why, but it's such a major factor in learning. But like, did you have any like learn anything from your podcast recently?
Like any learning experiences?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really interesting. Yeah, I actually, it's funny looking back at old podcast videos and just kind of cringing in a sense. But I would say one of the things I didn't really understand was I thought podcasting used to be just asking really good questions. And I know when I saw your podcast, because a couple of the people I've interviewed have been on your show,
Mhm.
um, questions and like the way, obviously the host asking different questions, having different types of conversations, that's really important. But also I didn't understand the importance of having a microphone, having a good quality camera, because my podcast, it's on Spotify, but it's also like a video podcast, so you
Yeah.
can not only listen to it but also watch it. So it's like, okay, I got to make sure I look as professional as possible. So I think that's been a learning curve, just because I didn't realize how much they were important, because I thought, again, it was just, let's ask really good questions. So now I have a microphone, now I have a camera, and I hope to like sound really good after during each conversation. I think the other thing is timing as well, because I'm a college student, and so right now I'm going through a couple of final exams, and so maybe not now, but definitely like throughout this past semester, trying to figure out when to schedule an interview, when to do research for a guest while balancing your academics. I think that also plays a challenge as well. So trying to balance everything is a challenge, and also just the fact that you got to have the best equipment. Not when I say best equipment, I don't mean like the $500 microphone, but like best equipment in terms of like, this is what you need to make sure that people want to hear your voice and like you present yourself as professional as possible.
Like, that is honestly the struggles I have faced, like, for all these last 2 years, because when I look back on those videos from, like, the beginning of the podcast 2 years ago, I always, like, cringe as well. I'm like, "Why is my quality like that?" Like, I wasn't as serious about this as I am now, but when I look back, I'm like, "Oh, that's horrible. I don't know why I got so many views on this video if it's so bad." And I didn't even have a microphone either. I had nothing. I just had a computer and a camera that was not the best. It was a school camera, and it wasn't a good quality, and it was just a whole different story, and it was so awful. But now I know that at least 2 years later, I know it's used. Because of course, when you do a video podcast, I know sometimes like if you just do kind of audio podcast, sometimes you're like, oh, they won't see me, I can look miserable, I can wear sweatshirts and like a hoodie. Like sometimes I even do that every single day. I just wear like a hoodie or whatever I want because I'm just supposed to be like changing. But it's like with being presentable, if you have like a video podcast like this one is, it's always like when you look at yourself and you're in like past episodes, I'm like, oh, I looked like I just got out of bed, even though I didn't. Like, it's like with being presentable is always like a big factor in what the podcast is about. But of course, if you have like bad quality or you look a mess, people are like, what is she doing? Like, what is she doing in this platform? But like, what are some like your favorite like episodes that you got to film on My Curly Goodness podcast?
Yeah, that's an interesting one because I remember when I saw this on your question sheet and I had to think about it because in one way or another, what I like to do after each episode is take notes and just think about what I learned from each episode. But if I had to choose I guess like a favorite episode, it's difficult because I mean I think in one way or another every episode brought something different.
Yeah.
Um, I'd say my favorite one that I've released. Oh, that's a tough one.
I don't know. It's
Okay.
like
I'm gonna
choosing your
say
own kid. It's like choosing your own kid. Yeah, I totally get that.
uh, I would say so. I'll probably say this because I'm a big soccer fan. So I interviewed someone by the name of Brianna Pinto. She is a professional soccer player for North Carolina Courage, which is in the women's soccer league. And I'd say that was probably I think that's an interview that comes out uh, or that I think of because it was cool to connect with. It was cool to talk to a soccer player, but as someone who's like really big into like not just Columbus Crew but like U.S. men's national team, she was one of the few people that got to speak in front of FIFA, which is like the governing body for soccer. And this was back in 2018, but she was one of the few people to help convince FIFA to bring the World Cup to United States, Canada, and Mexico in 2026. So being able to connect, being able to talk to someone who did something incredible for the sport and particularly for North America was pretty cool. So I would say probably that comes to mind. But I will also say, like, if there are any guests listening, all of you guys have been my favorite. It's not like one kind of sticks to, like, it's not like that's my favorite one. I think all of them is, I enjoyed every episode. So it's kind of hard to choose, but I feel like just because I'm a soccer fan, that's where I'll go with it.
Yeah, that's a good answer. Like, it's like with me having so many guests, it's hard to choose one specifically. I always have to choose at least like five of them because there's literally so many. Like if it was like baseball or sports related, I'm like this person. Means I come from a sports family, so I always have to like favorite sports people if it's the baseball or something. Because of course, we're growing up in baseball field, you always had to choose baseball over everything. And I'm sure if
Mm.
it was for you for soccer as well, I'm actually super jealous you got to interview her. I mean, she sounds really incredible. But like, who is kind of like your dream guest to have on a podcast? Like, is there anyone that you want to have on, or you've been trying to get on? Because I know for me, it's really a whole list of people.
Oh, should I keep should I keep this a secret? I'm kidding. It's funny because like I spoke about this with a friend of mine, and it's like one of the things that I don't like. One of the reasons why I sometimes struggle with this question is I feel like if I say my favorite guest or like like the people I'd like to interview, I feel like people might think of my guest as bait in some way. So it's like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm interviewing this person only to hopefully get this person.
Yeah.
So sometimes I struggle with that question, but at the same time, I feel like uh it's okay to I guess it's I think and maybe you probably know this better because I know you've done podcasting for a while,
Mhm.
but um I don't think it's I interviewed Seika Brown. She's a mental health
Oh
activist,
yeah.
and one of the things we talked about because she was recognized by Selena Gomez for her work in mental health, but it's like it's one thing to like being recognized by someone as famous as Selena Gomez is
Mhm.
almost like the icing in the cake, in the sense of like her goal was to have conversations about mental health, not to be recognized by someone famous. So it's like focus on the cake, not the icing or the cherry on top. So like I just kind of like when I look at that question, it's more like I just want to be able to talk to people, and I don't care if they're local, national, or global. So I know it's kind of a long answer, but that's kind of like my philosophy about like the that question. But if I do want to, and I'm only saying it because of the impact they have made, I would say this goes back to I'll pick a guy and a girl, but for guy, I would say he's a professional soccer player. His name is Marcus Rashford. He
Mhm.
plays for Manchester United in England, but it's not just because of what he does on the field, but he's also very vocal about giving back to his community, helping
Mhm.
people in marginalized communities in England. He plays for England internationally, so I think he would be a great person to talk to, just because again it goes back to the fact that like when we see athletes as or entertainers, we forget that they're human. So it's like this is
Yeah.
kind of a human moment to give back. So I think that's a so as a guy, I'd say Marcus Rashford. And then as a girl, I would say I'm also I'm not a big Marvel fan, maybe like medium, I guess.
Yeah.
But crap, what was I just forgot? Oh yeah, so I would love to interview Iman Vellani, who
Mhm.
stars as Miss Marvel in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because I'm South Asian, and so seeing a South Asian character on the big screen is pretty cool. I know she's a girl, but at the end of the day, there's still things that I'm like, oh yeah, that's very South Asian like. So I'd say Iman Vellani for a girl, and then for a guy, Marcus Rashford. I know that was
Oh.
a long answer, but like it's a complicated one.
Yeah, it's always like for me, it's always very complicated because it's always changing every week. Like for me, it's like one day it's like Gina Davis, or next day it's Hugh Jackman, or someday it's Justin Turner. Like it always changes because there's such a big list. But with having a guest, I know you said earlier with choosing rather in the moment than rather trying to push yourself to get this guest on. I'm literally like, it always depends on a day for me because one day I'm always pushing for a guest, and next day I'm just living a journey. If they listen and want to come on, they're more than welcome. But sometimes I'm just like, if I don't get this person on while I'm doing this podcast, I'm literally gonna quit. Like this is all like I'm hoping. Because like as
Yeah.
sometimes some people are like, if I get this guest on, and whenever I'm doing this podcast, I'm really never going to do podcasts again because this is all I've been looking for. Like I know so many people they're like that, but sometimes I'm just have that attitude. I'm like, uh, that's kind of been over with for the last 2 years. But why do you think with your podcast aims is really sharing people's experiences and stories? I know with Sika Brown, I interviewed her on this Instagram series I did like last year, and with her, she's really doing amazing work. But like with sharing people's experiences, specifically in Gen Z on your podcast, like why do you think sharing our experiences and stories is important, especially nowadays in 2023?
Yeah, so I will say why it's important is this is a very common term in mental health, but it's a really important, or not term, it's a phrase. It's a really important phrase in mental health, which is you're not alone. And when you hear people's stories, sometimes when you're going through a difficult challenge, whether that's failing an exam or going through a difficult period of time in your life, it can feel like you're the only one going through something. But at the end of the day, when you're able to listen to people who have done things, especially our age, it
Mhm.
gives you this sense of hope that okay, I may not go through with I may not relate to what this person went through or is going through currently, like not maybe 100% of the time, but I can relate to them in some other way. And so when I bring people to share about their stories, I want to challenge them. I want to challenge them and talking about the challenges that they went through, is because a lot of people, of course, we'd love to have success in whatever we want to pursue, but also at the same time, we experience more challenges, rejections, setbacks, obstacles than successes. So by being able to talk about our story in a way where we were able to reflect on our life, we give people hope in knowing that we're able to overcome different challenges, even if we haven't read, even if we don't relate to the challenges that they went through. So it's just that sense of hope that you're not alone, that yeah, you might be going through a difficult period or challenge, but at the same time, you still, as long you're not alone. There are people out there that have experienced something that you've experienced one way or another, and they were able to do incredible things. So it's like this sense of, you know what, I may be going through this, but I know that I'm able to overcome this because these people have overcome this.
And that's really the mission that like everyone should live. So of course, with being a podcast host, it can really come with a many struggles and obstacles in this industry. Like every job has its struggles. With what you said earlier, like you face more struggles than success, and that's something I'm honestly trying to figure out to this day is how I can push through rather than get more success and struggles. But like, what coming with that, like, we're talking about circles, like, how do you deal with biggest like, your struggles and obstacles as a podcast host? Because, of course, with everybody, it's very different. Like, I'm still trying to figure that out to this day, to be quite honest with you. But what are some of the like, how do you handle all of that, like, as a podcast host?
I think the biggest way to deal with challenges and obstacles is, I think the first thing that comes to mind is not beat yourself up more than you need to. I think as podcast hosts, we do have a pressure in trying to have like the best episode we can have, or best
Yeah.
experience for each guest. But even though we can be critical on ourselves, and we can always do that. There's always room to grow. Don't beat yourself up too much to the point where you consider quitting. Because if you love podcasting, you should continue to or you should continue to produce more episodes. Don't try to beat yourself over just a bad episode, because at the end of the day, while as we continue on with our journey, we're always going to have a bad recording experience. And I'm
Mhm.
not talking about like a bad guest, but like a bad host where you're like, oh, I could have done this, oh, I could have done that. So it's always great to like, first thing to note is that not everyone is perfect, and don't beat yourself too much, because podcasting is a journey, and growth is not linear. It's going to be an up and
Mhm.
down thing as you continue on. So I think number one, just remembering that don't beat yourself up too much. It's a process, and just embrace it. I think the second most important thing is connect with other podcasters, because the way they view success and failure is different from how people who are not connected to podcasts in one way or another, they see success and failure differently.
Mhm.
So for example, when I've connected with a couple of podcasters in the past, and one of the things they will tell me is, and this is something I think can help people like your listeners, in terms of like what advice would I give to those who want to start a podcast, is focus more on, it goes back to like the cake analogy, but focus more on the cake, not the icing or the cherry on top. Because people will say, well, your podcast is good because you brought these people on, or people will say you bring your guests, your success is based on how many views you're averaging.
Mhm.
But the people that I've learned from will tell me, focus on creating the best content possible. So what I would say is, because this is a challenge I'm still going through, which is ignore your numbers, ignore your analytics, ignore anything that gives you this weird feeling of, is my podcast good? Because your podcast is going to be focused more so on the content and the stories you're sharing, as opposed to all the stuff that's kind of like out of your control in one way. So I would say the two main things would be, don't beat yourself up too much, which that's something I tried to remind myself, because I will have bad interviews,
Yeah.
but like as a host. But the second thing is, connect with fellow podcasters, especially if they share the same values that you do, because they're going to help you realize that your success is not like the success that you really want to have. That the success that you want to have is not what, wait, how do I word this? You want success, but success is not how other people usually treat success. Like, it's not about viewership or numbers. It's more about creating content and creating the best possible content that you can.
Yeah, like I like the literally you literally said it better than I ever could, because as a podcast host, there are many interviews where I'm like, I just don't want to publish it because this is this bad. Like I'm sure you have plenty of those moments as well. You're like, I love this person and they brought so many insights, but the way I handle this and the way they kind of explain things is I don't think it will be right for my viewers to listen to this. And sometimes I probably did that at my end, and I'm just like, if I publish this, I'm probably going to never do podcasting again. But but like with having a podcast and connect with other podcasters, it really does help you grow as a podcast. So of course, me people I've been maybe doing it longer than you. Like everyone has their different experiences in interviewing, and sometimes people just do it on their own. Like not every podcast really interviews people. So really, every podcast has different ways on how they want to approach their own. And with having a podcast host, like for me personally, I'm always doubting myself and how many views and clicks the podcast is getting. And it really I'm sure it's for you as well, but it's like, why am I doing this and I'm not getting this many views as this person? And I've been doing it longer than them. Like I've always doubt myself. I'm sure maybe it's for you as well that I'm like, well, is it me? Because I feel like I'm a better sometimes I'm like, well, I'm a better interviewer than them, then why they get more views? And like it's always that self-doubt talking. But do you often deal with that? Like all that self-doubt that you're like, why this person gave many views, but why am I why am I not getting as many views as and everything? Do you ever really feel that way oftentimes?
Yeah, I'd say when I first started the podcast, I felt like every day I was checking the number of views, like, okay, how many people are listening to this? And I realized it wasn't really good for my mental health to just try and
Oh,
chase something that I know is going to take some time. So when I first started, I would say, yeah, of course, like every episode, check how many numbers. Nowadays, it's more like I kind of understand that it's going to be a process. And that may have come from, again, going back to the idea of connecting with fellow other podcasters, because they've had a lot of success, but those success came with time. So as soon as I accepted that in my mindset, I realized I should not care about the numbers at this time. Maybe some other time, but right now let's focus on things that I can definitely work on to maybe help gain one more listener. So yeah, I'd say not anymore. Sometimes I'll still check, but when I see the number, it's more of like, okay, I guess I have more work to do, as opposed to like the idea of this is the end of the world. So that's kind of how I see it nowadays.
yeah, like, yeah, I don't know why, but it always depends on like on the day for me. Like some days I'm just like, oh, I don't want to check it. I'm too busy for that. I have many other things to focus on than analytics. But then one day I'm just like, whoa, what am I doing wrong for not getting as many listens as I thought, even though this person's a really good guest and has a lot of work they do, and why is it like not turning out the way I like hope to be? But it's always like I know this is like a very cliche saying, but I feel like everything does come for a reason. Like I know with everyone, they're like, "Oh, I'm doing this, this, and this," but it's not working. But it's also a way that you do your podcast and the way you do things is also a huge way in what you do. Because of course, with everything, there's always changes you can make to make this a success. Because everything you have to work hard for it, even though sometimes I'm just like, oh, I'm too lazy to do this. Like I'm always doing this. But it really does come in with tons of work. And I know with me, I'm just like always pushing myself to get as many views as possible in these episodes, even though it's really something I shouldn't do. It's always, if people like it, they can listen. If they don't have to. But I know with like your podcast, like you often feature Gen Z voices, which is awesome. Is I know with a lot of Gen Z, they really need to get their voices out there on different topics. But why did you kind of decide to feature Gen Z voices instead of like kind of featuring all of these people around the world that's specifically Gen Z?
Yeah. So one of the things I want to do before I answer your question, one of the things I do want to do is definitely bring in more people from different generations, because I know the podcast that I listen to, they do that as well.
Mhm.
But why I thought of Gen Z was, I think it's something that I wish my 16, 17-year-old had, which is back in high school. This is a little bit more about me, but back in high school, I had friends, but I didn't have that many close friends.
Mhm.
And we didn't get to really like hang out. Either that's just because of scheduling, or maybe because I just didn't fit into their friend group. And it's still something I struggle with today. Like at college, I usually eat and study by myself, which used to be painful, but I kind of am okay with it in a sense. Although sometimes I do wish to have that friend to hang out every once in a while. So when it comes to Gen Z and talking to people of my generation, I kind of use my podcast as a way to get, I guess, in a way, hang out with people. So it's
Mhm,
like it's a bit personal. But the other thing the other reason why I chose Gen Z is because I want to focus on those vulnerable, authentic stories. And I know different generations above Gen Z, they're capable of doing that. But
mhm,
a lot of the podcasts that I've listened to when they featured Gen Zers, is more about the work that they do and the things that they've accomplished, as opposed to the challenges and obstacles and experiences they have faced. And so when I thought about this podcast, I was like, okay, people love talking about that. But let's focus on, instead of like older generations, I hope that doesn't come off offensive, but focusing more on Gen Zers, because at the end of the day, it goes back to the idea that we are all humans. And I know that there could be an argument that, well, older generations have experienced more than this generation, and it's true. But
mhm.
also at the same time, Gen Zers can still experience pain, rejection, obstacles the same way that anyone else can. So I really want to be able to challenge myself and trying to get my guests to be as authentic and honest as possible, talking about those that human experience, as opposed to always talking about the work that a person does, or about like all the cool things that a person gets to do, because that's not something that's relatable to a lot of people. But rejection and the things that, like, where you're like, oh, this was a bad day or bad experience, that's something a lot of people in one way or another can relate to.
It really is. Like, that's honestly something I can relate to because, of course, everyone has different experiences. But with Gen Z, like, with having voices tell, like, one of the reasons I started this podcast is, of course, connect with people, but also meet new people that I would have met ever in my life. Like, I know with you as well, like, I am the person that always is looking for this type of friend group. I'm always like looking, to, okay, where do I belong in this friend group, or who should I be close to? Who should I not? Like, I'm always the person that's always aware of who I should be around with or how to connect with people. But I know with podcasts, it really is a great way to connect and meet new people that you would never meet. And also, get together with them if you're in their area. Because of course, with having a podcast, you meet people internationally. And so when you connect those people in their area, like Florida or something, you can connect those people if you're still in touch. Like when I went to Florida 2 months ago, I connected with one guest I interviewed that when I was in the area. So it really is a great way to really just meet people and also hang out with them if you're in the area, and also, making a difference in these people's lives and really just bringing their story to life. Because who knows, they might not have the chance to do it again, and people might not ask those questions again.
For sure. And it was funny because like I said, I struggle with like joining friend groups. Sometimes I feel like I it's so weird because like my little brother, he's 13, no, he's 14, excuse me, but he talks to his friends every day, and I sometimes worry about like I feel like I'm one text message away from losing a friend, in the sense that like I might reach out to them at a bad time and then regret it later on. So I feel like it's weird because I mean, like I said, I'm a student at Ohio State, but I usually, like, you'll usually see me eating by myself, studying by myself. One time I went to the movie theater by myself, and I told a friend of mine I did that, and he was like, "Why? That's such a weird thing." But I honestly didn't mind it. So I feel
Mhm.
like in a way, yeah, I'm kind of weird for being able to do things that usually require multiple people, but I don't mind it. However, it doesn't hurt to at least have someone every once in a while to interact with. And so I think that's what podcasting has done for me. And that's why I continue to do it, even though, like we talked about, when it comes to like viewership and analytics, even if that might not go your way, just the fact that you're able to meet with someone every single day, or not every single day, but like meet with people from all over the world who are doing incredible things. Um, I think that's a great feeling to have. So it's not to say like those are my new friends, but it's like, if they're busy, if these people are busy, that's fine. I got this person in a way.
Yeah, like you're right on that because as long as you're like meeting these people, and they might not be friends for life, but they're also connections you can reach out to for different projects that you're planning on. But with having,
Absolutely.
like, of course, when you said you went to the movies by yourself and everything, like, it really does, taking time for yourself when you have those situations always good because of course you probably sometimes people would be like, oh, I don't want to do this, but I'm like, oh, y'all want to do this with friends and stuff. But sometimes I know with some people they want to do it just alone, not with everybody else. And oftentimes I get that way. I'm like, oh, like I kind of want to do this alone, like, but thank you for offering. Like those type of attitudes. Of course, nothing's wrong with doing things alone. Like, of course, it's always great to have friends and to do these things like studying, going out to eat, going to the movies. But it's always good to really be like, oh, I wanted to see this movie. Maybe if no one's available, I can go see by myself. Like having those moments is always good for like your mental well-being rather than having to do what everyone like wants you to do in that moment.
Yeah, and also I feel like it's in a way a superpower in the sense that nowadays, whenever I see a group of friends, whether I know or don't know directly, I'm actually not anxious as much as I used to be. Because for a while, I used to be like, they're having a group of friends. Where are my group of friends? But nowadays, it's more like, okay, you got your thing. That's cool. I'm perfectly fine by myself. And it's not to say, like, again, it's not like I always want to do things by myself. There are moments where I'm like, I actually would like to have other people with me. But at the same time, I would say it's really important to like hang out with yourself, which is such a weird thing, but I feel like it's a valuable thing as well, which is that it gives you that superpower in the sense that you don't always need to be dependent on other people for your happiness. You can also depend on yourself to just make you happy in whatever that may be.
Yes, you're exactly right. And I think that's a perfect way to end this episode. Like, absolutely loved filming this conversation. It was an honor to have you on. I hope everyone enjoyed listening to this episode. Make sure to go check him out and his podcast. And by the way, like before I forget, like where can people like find you on social media and stuff if they want to connect with you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram at Hamza Islam underscore 2002. If anyone's interested in learning more about the podcast, you can follow the podcast on Instagram at the OMCG podcast. We are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. We're also on YouTube as well. So these are a few places where you can find me and the podcast on social media.
Perfect. Make sure everyone to go check this podcast out. I 100% recommend checking out his podcast. His podcast is super inspiring. And if you want to have like connect with more Gen Z like people, that podcast is for you. So thank you everyone for listening. I appreciate you taking the time and I hope you have a good rest of your day, everyone. And thank you again.